Okay, so is everybody set with chapter 15? As set as you can be? Again, some of you have a little more studying to do. So please spend the time and do it. So now we are going to be talking about what? The endocrine system talks about who? The glands that produce what? Hormones. Okay? So we are talking in chapter 16 about hormones. Hormones are closely related to another system that we've already talked about. Kind of a control system. The nervous system. So another way to change what cells are doing for a living is to control that metabolism that's going on within cells by exposing them to chemicals. Chemicals that they have specific receptors for. And these chemicals are called hormones. Now, in order for a hormone to affect a cell, do all hormones affect all cells? No. In order for a hormone to cause a change within the cell, and when I talk about change, I talk about what's going on metabolically, they have to have a specific receptor for that hormone on their plasma membrane. If I have a receptor for that hormone on my plasma membrane, I am what we call a target cell. So the endocrine system consists of a bunch of different groups of glandular material that produce these chemicals, hormones, that help control what's going on in the body. Now, there's two types or two categories of endocrine system family members. One is called, and you've heard this before, I think, when we talked way back when, in chapter 4, when we talked about tissues, we talked about the difference between endocrine and exocrine. You remember that? Endocrine glands, and what kind of tissue do you think they are? What kind? What's inner tissue? Is that a new category? Think about all the tissues we studied. Epithelial, which line, you were right on the inner tissue, but that's not what we call it. They line things or cover things. So these glands are made of some sort of epithelial-like tissue, and these cells produce and secrete hormones. Now the exocrine and endocrine glands are a little bit different in their delivery. An endocrine gland delivers its product where? It goes out, so it spits it out, and where does it go? Into the circulatory system. So it goes directly into the circulatory system, which then carries it somewhere throughout the whole body. Yes? And blood goes everywhere, doesn't it? Yeah, pretty much everywhere. Because what does blood do for a living? It transports nutrients and hormones and antibodies and wastes. And it's also going to transport fluids back and forth too. Yeah, oxygen, carbon dioxide. Oxygen would be in the nutrient category. Carbon dioxide would be in the what? Waste category. Okay? So it also carries hormones, and those specific hormones from the endocrine glands. The exocrine glands, and we just learned about one last chapter, secretes its product through what? Little tubes or ducts. I don't know why I can't say that word. Ducts. It doesn't sound right when I say it, though. It sounds like ducks. Not ducks, quack, quack. Tubes, ducts, from one place to another. So the lacrimal glands, and remember they were kind of sitting above the eye, create tears and secrete them through tubes that then squirt them out, and they wash over the eye exterior eye. That type of gland is an exocrine gland. The way I remember it is this: the product exits through a tube. So, where are these guys located? Well, they are dotted throughout the body, and we are going to learn what they do for a living and what the hormones they produce do for a living as well. So, this diagram shows us some of the guys that we're going to talk about in this chapter. Starting from the top, we have something called the pineal gland, and that's hanging out in midbrain regions. Anybody know what that does for a living? It makes a substance called melatonin. What's that doing for you? Some of you have high melatonin levels as we speak. It makes you sleepy. Hypothalamus. This guy is amazing, the little hypothalamus. That little brain region does so much. And he's always going to get talked about, but he also produces hormones as well. The pituitary gland, we call this guy the master endocrine gland. The reason, it makes a bunch of different hormones. The thyroid gland in the neck region is going to help us with metabolic rate. The thymus, it sits right on top of the heart. Oh, I'm talking with my hands again. It sits right on top of the heart, and this is going to help teach our cells of immunity to recognize self-antigens, to be able to recognize proteins on your cells as being yours. I call this, when we hit the immune system, the thymus is T-cell kindergarten.
So, like, if someone has autoimmunity, does that not work correctly?
Correct. Or something goes awry in the cell recognition process. And once we hit the lymphatic system and immunity, we'll talk about that specifically. The adrenals, which sit on top of the kidneys, are going to produce a bunch of hormones. Many of them are helpful in water regulation. Nice place for me to sit, on top of the kidneys. Yes? Pancreas. It's going to be talked about in this chapter, and guess when else I'm going to talk about it? Digestive system. So it's an exocrine and endocrine gland, and it produces a bunch of stuff for us. We'll talk about it again later on. And then your reproductive organs. They also produce hormones, and guess what those hormones might be important for? The maturation of your reproductive cells. So ovaries if you're a female and testes if you're a male are also going to be discussed in this chapter as well. So, hormones. What you need to know in this chapter, and I think I've already told students this, or a student, I'm going to tell you this. What you need to know from this chapter is the gland, what it makes, and what its target is. So what does it do for a living? And one of the best ways to study this chapter is to grab a piece of paper and do this. Watch. What did I just make? I made 3 columns, right? So if you put the pituitary gland, and then you put the hormones it makes, and then you put their target, what they do for a living over here, you can get it all on one nice piece of paper. The other thing that's going to help you in this chapter is the tables. Because after we discuss a group of glands, for example, pituitary gland, there's a lot of hormones it makes. If you look on page 606, 607, there you go. Okay? So that's what I want you to know from this chapter. As far as specifics of chemistry and how it affects different organ systems, more detail, we're going to hit all these guys in the rest of the semester. So if I affect the renal system, for example, when we talk about the renal system, we're going to revisit these guys again. So you're going to hear their names again. But right now, I want you to know what I just said. The other thing you have to understand is the mechanism of action of these hormones. Not all of them work the same. There's two major classes of hormones. We have something called the water-soluble hormone, and we have something called the lipid-soluble hormone. And you've kind of heard me say this a couple times already. We actually saw it again when we looked at the physiology of the eye. But water-soluble hormones trigger something called the second messenger system. Does that ring a bell? Okay. Now we're going to talk in detail about what a second messenger system is. So if I am a cell that possesses a receptor for a specific water-soluble hormone, in this case, the hormone is those little pink balls over there at the end. If I have a receptor for that hormone, once the receptor comes in contact with the hormone, and how would it come in contact with the hormone? Where do you think the hormone is? Yeah, it's in the circulatory system. It's in the bloodstream. What's blood made of? A liquid portion, plasma, and a whole bunch of cells, right? Well, where does all that liquid from blood go? Everywhere. So it comes out of the circulatory system and bathes all of the tissues and all of the cells throughout your entire body. So if I secrete a hormone into the circulatory system, eventually it's going to get into the fluid that bathes all of the cells throughout your entire body. You with me there? All right, so the hormone finally makes it to its target. And once it comes in contact with the target, and you can see these steps, and boy, wouldn't this make a nice essay question? Put a little star beside that. Just a little hint. On page 597 in your text, we can see the steps. And this is, I like this. When I give essay questions, as you know, if you had me last semester, I like the steps. It's nice. I'm one of those people that follows a protocol. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So I kind of like that when I ask an essay question. So, hormone binds to the receptor. And we can see that over at number 1 on your diagram that's being projected here. So once I come in once I come in contact, I know. What? How to screw up with the... I don't use it that much. I should use it more often. Okay, so over here we are talking about hormone coming in contact with receptor. This is the first messenger, the beginning of a series of chemical reactions that will change what's going on within the cell. Once the hormone comes in contact with that receptor, and what is the receptor? It's basically one of the proteins on the surface of the cell. So that is a protein. Sorry. Yep. No. The hormone can be a protein, but it can be other things. I'm talking about this guy here. This is a receptor, and it's proteins. So some of the proteins, remember when we talked about plasma membranes? Some of those proteins on the surface of the cell are actually receptors for hormones. So once the hormone comes in contact with the receptor, it's going to cause a change in shape. And it's going to kick off a series of chemical reactions. It's going to get this next little protein, which is on the inside of the plasma membrane, to move. And this is the G protein. He's a protein too. So activation of G protein happens next. Do you ever see usually you can find a whole bunch of them at Easter. You know those cute little chicks that you wind up and they walk along? I used to have one as an example, but he fell off the edge and broke. That's kind of what happens to my G protein. It starts to move across the inner membrane. So the receptor in step 2 is activated and moves along the inner surface of a plasma membrane until it becomes contacted with an enzyme. In this case, and there's many different second messenger systems, in this particular second messenger system, which we call the cyclic AMP second messenger system. Why do you think we call it cyclic AMP second messenger system? Because guess who my second messenger is in this system? Cyclic AMP, that little guy. So in this particular second messenger system, when my G protein hits the enzyme is called adenylate cyclase. Again, other second messenger systems, other enzymes. But this particular one, that's the name of the enzyme. Once that enzyme and the G protein come in contact with each other, it is going to kick off my second messenger. And again, who's my second messenger in this system? Cyclic AMP, that cute little dot there. Now, cyclic AMP is then going to cause changes, chemical changes, when it becomes activated within the cell. And there's several different proteins that will then become activated. So here in step 5, we see cyclic AMP activating inactive proteins, causing them to change and become active proteins. And they are then going to cause chemical changes within the cell. So some of the enzymes can be stimulated. It can cause cellular secretions to occur. It can cause ion channels to open. These are some examples of changes within the cell. It doesn't mean it causes all these changes, but these are some examples of changes within the cell. So say, for example, I am a cell that makes insulin. And I have to use that insulin to cause changes within my cells. Who's the target cell for insulin? I'll give you a hint. All of them. Because what does insulin do? Does anybody know? It lowers blood sugar. How? It's actually going to, through this second messenger system, cause ion channels to open. And the ion channels it causes to open are ones that are going to cause glucose from your blood plasma to get sucked into your cell at a faster rate. What do I do with glucose inside the cell? I'm going to use it to make ATP. So that's why insulin lowers blood glucose levels. Because when I measure blood glucose levels, guess what I'm measuring it in? Blood what? Plasma. So it's getting sucked inside the cells. Can I measure it in the plasma anymore? No, because now it's inside the cells. So in order for glucose to be used at fast enough rate, we got to pull it in at a faster rate so I can use it to make ATP. So that's what insulin does. When you go to Friendly's, and this is my dream, so be with me, peanut butter buster sundae, you know that big one with all the peanut butter and hot fudge and all of that stuff. Kill for one of those right now. Lots of sugar, right? Carbohydrates. You eat one of those. What happens? What happens to your blood glucose levels? They start to go up. That's going to be the chemical signal for who to secrete insulin. Your pancreas. That's where insulin is produced. Only there, but all the cells in your body need it. So what then happens to insulin? Secreted from your pancreas, it goes where? Goes into your circulatory system, comes in contact with target cells, everybody in this case, and the glucose that's now in your blood plasma can get sucked into the cell so you can do what? Make ATP. The other thing insulin does is causes you to use some of that glucose in storage mode. What do I do with excess glucose? Do you know? If I don't use it, I store it. As what? Fat. If you've ever heard of something called the Glycemic Index, it has to do with how fast your blood glucose levels get raised. If I eat a substance that raises my blood glucose very quickly, guess what I'm going to produce a lot of very quickly? Insulin. So I can use it, but I'm also going to do what? Store for the rainy day. Yes? So be careful for foods that do that. You want your blood glucose levels, the release of that glucose, to go in nice and slow so we can evenly distribute or release insulin. So you can use that glucose and not do what with it? Store it for a rainy day. So that's an example of a second messenger system. Cyclic AMP is only one of the second messenger systems. They also describe another one called PIP2, which is a calcium signaling second messenger system. There's also one called IP3, and I don't see it. I think they removed it. But there's more than one, is my point. So there's several different second messenger systems, and they produce several different second messengers and activate metabolism or inactivate metabolism in different ways within the cell. So that's water-soluble hormones. We also have another category of hormone called lipid-soluble hormones. By the way, in a water-soluble hormone second messenger system, do hormones enter the cell? Never. They don't come in, right? Not true for lipid-soluble hormones. So this is the big difference. Again, I have to be a target cell. I have to have some sort of receptor for this hormone. But that receptor is actually going to bring the hormone into the cell, where it's going to cause changes in metabolism. So in this diagram, we see that hormones, and in this case the hormone is here, it's a steroid hormone, is allowed to come into the cell through a receptor on the plasma membrane, and we don't see it, so let's draw it in. There's the receptor right there. It's going to come into the cell, and then it needs help getting around. Why does it need help getting around? Anybody know? It's a steroid hormone. Hint. Steroids belong in what family? Organic molecule. Chapter 2. Lipids! Whew. I almost had my next birthday waiting for that one. Lipids! You did? You got to talk loud. Lipid-soluble hormone, which means what? I have trouble getting around in fluids because I am what? Hydrophobic. So in order for me to do my job, I need somebody to help me out. So I can float through blood plasma, which is mostly what? Water. I need a carrier. So within the cell, there is a carrier. It doesn't show it in this diagram. It'll deposit it into the cell, and then it's going to hook up with what we call a receptor protein. So it can then float through the cytoplasm. Does that ring a bell? What's the cytoplasm? More fluid, but where is it? It's inside the cell. So in order for me to do my job as a steroid hormone or a lipid-soluble hormone, I have to get into the nucleus. And I have to actually attach myself to DNA. Oh, more steps. What a nice essay question that might make. So, I have to get into the nucleus, and I have to attach myself with the help of a receptor protein directly to the portion of the genetic material within that cell that is going to be read. Now, what is genetic material for? And I hope someone comes up with the real fancy schmancy scientific explanation that we learned in Chapter 3 last semester. 2 words. Begins with a T. Transcription and translation. Your genetic, yeah, it was kind of in the ballpark. Remember transcription and translation? Yeah, if you don't, you better go dust off some brain cells. But the DNA, your genetic material, is being read so you can make the proper what for you? Proteins. So I unzip the DNA and I copy the information during transcription. Is this ringing a bell? Oh, it better. I form a strand of what? Messenger RNA. Then messenger RNA leaves the nucleus and goes and hangs out where? On the ribosomes, where another RNA molecule, transfer RNA, is going to help by the interaction of codons and anticodons to link together specific what? Amino acids in a specific order dictated by the DNA. That's exactly what you were going to say, right? Yeah. So that hormone complex is actually going to cause the cell to make what? A protein, but the same protein it was making all along before it showed up? A different protein. So it's going to actually regulate the process of transcription and translation and cause the cell to make a different protein. A different protein may have a different function, right? Like it might be, what are protein in nature that are floating around in your circulatory system that you can think of off the top of your head? Maybe an antibody? Maybe a hormone? So some hormones can actually cause cells to make other hormones. Maybe I want to stop doing something. Can hormones also cause a cell to stop doing something? Yeah. So they can inhibit or stimulate cell metabolism. Yes? So the difference between a water-soluble, can't get in the cell, second messenger system, series of chemical events, and a lipid-soluble, get in the cell, go to the nucleus, and change what directly? The 2 T's. Transcription and eventually translation. Yes? So know the difference between lipid-soluble and water-soluble hormones. So we look on page 600 in the interaction of hormones at the target. So again, hormones can work together with other hormones to create changes in metabolism. That's called synergism. What's permissiveness? Does it take one to be permissive?
No.
It takes 2, doesn't it? So permissiveness is when that hormone needs another hormone in order to do its thing. And how about antagonism? What's an antagonist? Yeah, you're always given the opposite view or working against something. So what do you think an antagonistic hormone does? Shuts something else down, opposes something, works against something. Well, it's going to cause changes so that reactions can maintain metabolism. Homeostasis. Metabolism maintained. So again, back to the sundae, lots of sugar. At that point, I've disrupted homeostasis, haven't I? So what do I have to do? And I'm just talking about blood glucose levels. In my sundae, there's quite a few other things that I have to deal with besides glucose. But I've disrupted homeostasis. So now my cell's metabolism has to try to what? Balance it, bring it back to where it needs to be. Well, it works against something to help bring whatever the something is. The insulin out. But what happens when my blood sugar levels are good? Should I keep pumping out the insulin? No. So what do I have to do? I have to somehow stop it, don't I? Yes? Yes? Okay. So, know those terms. Control of hormone release. Some of them are released through negative feedback systems. And you all know what that is at this point, right? Again, back to the sundae again. I gotta get a sundae this weekend. Blood sugar, blood glucose levels go up. I disrupt homeostasis. Remember when we talked about negative feedback systems last semester? Do you remember what the example was that I used? The thermostat in your house, right? You have it set for a certain point. And now our thermostat is working very hard. Well, not today, thank goodness. We'll actually save a few dollars on our heating bill. But when the temperature goes down, I disrupt homeostasis, disrupt the set point. I'm going to cause something to happen, secretion of a hormone in this case when we talk about the endocrine system. That hormone is going to help change metabolism somehow to bring back homeostasis to set point, and then the whole thing is going to what? Get turned off. So that's a negative feedback system. Now, several different ways to stimulate hormone release, and these you need to know as well. Humoral stimulation. What's that? Some sort of level has gone awry. You didn't eat breakfast this morning. This happens a lot when you don't eat breakfast in the morning. Say your calcium levels start to go down. Where is this? When I talk about measuring all this stuff, where am I measuring it from? The circulatory system. In this case, calcium levels are going down in the circulatory system. Who keeps track of all these levels? Is there like a secretary somewhere in the body that's keeping track of everything going by? Yeah, there is. Most of them are where, do you know? Nope. Who has control of most things? That's part of it. What system? Nervous system. So as blood passes by specific receptors, the secretaries for whatever level it happens to be, in this case we're talking about calcium levels go down. So what do we have to do? Bring them back up. Why? Calcium's not that important, is it? Yeah, if you want any of your muscles to contract, including the ones that pump your heart and cause you to breathe. So we got to get that calcium level up. Central nervous system will stimulate the endocrine gland. In this case, anybody know who that is? Yeah, it's the parathyroid gland, excuse me. It hangs out in and around the thyroid gland. And it produces a hormone called parathyroid hormone, PTH. That's going to then enter the circulatory system and hit our target. Guess what our target is? If my calcium levels are low and I don't have breakfast, I die, right? No. Where do I store calcium? In your bones. And who's responsible for getting that calcium out when I need it? You studied this last semester. No, parathyroid hormone. But what cells? Osteo who? Clasts. Osteoclasts actually used to be, before they became an osteoclast, no. No. Monocytes. Monocytes in the circulatory system. Oh, how convenient. Because when that hormone, parathyroid hormone, enters the circulatory system, it's going to bang into a whole bunch of monocytes that are running around in that circulatory system. And it's going to cause them to change their metabolism, turn into osteoclasts, and they are then going to squeeze their way out of the circulatory system and go where? To the bone matrix to break it down, release it into that fluid, and what's going to happen to calcium levels? They're going to start to rise. So one way, humoral, is going to be sort of monitoring whatever is going on in the circulatory system. So when levels of different things like glucose and calcium and potassium and sodium and all the other stuff we're going to talk about when we talk about blood, when they are disrupted in homeostasis, I can stimulate hormone production humorally through the blood, through the humors. That's what blood is. Yes?
If you're too, like, the blood sugar is really low, you start to shake. Is that part of these, like?
That's one of the results of, because your nervous system is going to react a certain way and cause muscle contractions and cause problems like that. You get dizzy, you get weak. Yes? Did I answer that question? All right, we good? That's humoral. That's one way to release a hormone. That's not the only way, because the other control system in my body is also going to play a role in releasing hormones as well. Who's the other one? The nervous system. So the second way to stimulate hormone release is direct nervous stimulation from the nervous system. So a neuron, remember when we talked about neurons way back when, last semester? We said a neuron can communicate with one of three people or cells. One was another neuron, another one was muscles, and the third was a gland. So we can have direct stimulation from the nervous system through neural stimulus that can cause the secretion of hormones. And here they give us an example of stimulation from the preganglionic sympathetic fibers of the spinal nerves that will stimulate, and this is the adrenal gland, the adrenal medulla, causing it to release its hormones into the circulatory system. Okay? And some of the different hormones produced by the adrenal glands are those guys down there. Catecholamines, and an example is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Speed up, slow down guys. Yes? So if I need to speed something up and slow it down real quick, do I want to wait for the blood levels to go down and then for it to travel and then Wouldn't it be nice if the nervous system could do it for me very fast? Yes? So that's another way to stimulate hormones. And then other hormones can stimulate the release of hormones. So the third way is what? Hormonal. An example they use here is, yes, the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to produce hormones that are going to then stimulate release of hormones from several other players in the endocrine system. And here they show us the thyroid, the adrenal cortex, and the reproductive organs. Okay? So by releasing some hormones from the pituitary gland, I can then stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete their hormones. So know those three ways, okay? Everybody good so far? Anybody not good? More steps. So, the next part of the chapter now starts with the glands themselves. So basically I'm going to talk about the gland, I'm going to talk about the hormone it makes, and I'm going to talk about its target. So the first one we're going to talk about is who? No. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus. Because they kind of work hand in hand. Now, the pituitary gland is made up of two sections. One section has cells in it that make hormones. The other section is basically just a storage area. And it's a storage area for hormones that are made by somebody else. Guess who the somebody else is? The hypothalamus. Okay? So, the pituitary gland has another name. It's called the hypophysis. And there's a front part and there's a back part. And the pituitary gland hangs off the hypothalamus region in a stalk called the infundibulum. And we see that, where's the infundibulum? There it is. Right there. What we're going to find in that stalk is axons coming from the hypothalamus and running down to the storage part of the pituitary gland. So, hypophysis. There's a back part called the posterior pituitary. It has another name. Pituocytes are, what's a cyte? Cells in the pituitary gland. It's called the neurohypophysis. And the anterior pituitary gland in the front, what do we call that one? It's the adenohypophysis. Now guess which one stores, just look at the picture. Guess which one stores hormones produced by the hypothalamus? Which one? The posterior pituitary gland. You see the hypothalamus and the cells that synthesize oxytocin, an antidiuretic hormone. They then send that product for storage where? Into the posterior pituitary gland. So they're transported along the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract to the posterior pituitary gland. And they're stored there until we need it. Does anybody know what these guys do? Oxytocin. That's not so common. Except when you're ready to what? Give birth. The release of oxytocin is going to cause what? Uterine contractions. They have like derivatives of. What's ADH? This is the big one. Antidiuretic hormone. Antidiuretic hormone. Anybody know what a diuretic is? It causes you to excrete more water. So what do you think antidiuretic hormone does? Causes you to hold on to more water. So that's the posterior pituitary gland. It doesn't make its own thing, it stores. It stores for who? The hypothalamus. And release of those hormones will take place when needed. The other part of the pituitary gland is very busy. Sometimes we refer to the pituitary gland on the whole as the master endocrine gland because it secretes so many different hormones. Really, we should call who the master? The hypothalamus. But through what we call the hypophyseal portal system, we are going to release many, many different hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. Now, what are some of the hormones secreted by the anterior pituitary gland? Listed at the bottom. So the first one they talk about is growth hormone. What do you think that does for you? It helps you grow. So it's an insulin-like factor. It's going to help regulate metabolism. It's actually going to help regulate somebody else to help regulate metabolism. Any clues? The thyroid. So the next one they talk about, and I hate to leave this picture, but again, your tables are going to list all these guys. That's the pituitary gland tables. So growth hormone, and this is one of those nice little flow charts we see throughout the book, when it is released is going to go directly or have direct action to liver and other tissues, skeleton, extraskeletal substances. It's also going to have direct actions on metabolism, fat metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, all of which is related to growth. Now, why is fat metabolism and carbohydrate metabolism related to growth? You need those to give you enough what to grow? Energy. So they talk about some homeostatic imbalances. Too much growth hormone can cause too much what? Growth. Giantism. Excessive growth hormone can start messing with the way your bones grow. Acromegaly. To overgrowth of bony regions. And that can be a problem in joints of people's bones that grow too fast or too large. Another one produced by the pituitary gland is thyroid stimulating hormone, which will also have a direct effect on who? Thyroid stimulating the thyroid. So this is an example of what type of stimulation of hormone release from the three that we just talked about. Hormonal. So thyrotropins are affected, the release of thyroid hormones are affected by TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Who makes thyroid stimulating hormone? The anterior pituitary gland. Then we have a group of hormones called the adrenocorticotropic hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormones. These are the group of hormones that are going to affect the adrenal glands.
Where is that again?
It's on top of the kidneys. Gonadotropins, like FSH and LH. What are they doing for me? Who are they going to help stimulate? The gonads. And the gonads are where what is made? Sperm and or egg, oocytes, This is where you mature your reproductive cells. And when these are released, what do you think is going to happen? The whole process. What's that series of change that goes on in cells that causes me to become a reproductive cell rather than a somatic cell? Yeah, puberty, then you start releasing these, but what's that cellular reproduction process? Meiosis. Yes? These are the guys that are going to help stimulate meiosis in the gonads. Remember way back when we talked about the fact that some sort of trigger has to cause a cell to change and go into the meiosis phase? Well, this is it. So those are the gonadotropins, FSH and LH and GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, all produced by the, where? Who are we talking about? The anterior pituitary gland. Yes? Prolactin, what is that? Yeah, it's to help stimulate the production of milk in mammary glands. And prolactin inhibiting hormone, now known to be dopamine, will prevent prolactin secretions. So hypersecretions of prolactin might cause problems. Why? What's one of the big ingredients in milk? Not in our milk. That's cow's milk. Calcium. So it can start messing with calcium levels in the body as well. That's anterior. Posterior pituitary gland and the hypothalamic hormones are oxytocin. And again, the posterior pituitary gland is only a holding tank. Who actually makes oxytocin? The hypothalamus. And that's for uterine contractions during that childbirth thing. And it also is going to help trigger the release of what? After you give birth, what do you got to do? Feed that kid, right? So what else does it help the release of? Milk. So, what else? Milk release. You were right. He surprised himself. And then antidiuretic hormone, that's going to help regulate what? And ready for this big old nasty word? Osmoreceptors. What do you think they do for a living? Water balance. They look at osmotic concentration of dissolved substances in solution pressure throughout your body and help to regulate water control throughout your body. Okay? What organ system do you think they're going to come in contact with and do something to? Who helps regulate water balance? Who's the big player in the body? The kidneys. Okay, now blood has to filter through the kidneys and either suck out more water or hold on to more water depending on what's going on in the body. So this is going to play a role in affecting who gets absorbed and who doesn't. And we will pick up with the thyroid gland on Thursday.